A big thank you to the Civil Service Benevolent Fund for inviting Volunteering England and myself to speak with you this morning. I wanted to do 3 or 4 things quite briefly, but the first thing I wanted to do, and in some ways the most important thing I think, is just to remind us all about why volunteering matters so much, about its value to our communities and to our society. And I think we can do that in a number of ways. Volunteering matters because it has a huge economic worth. One study has suggested that volunteering is worth something like £40 billion to the UK economy. The figures are absolutely astounding. Something like 100 million hours of volunteer week is undertaken every week in this country. And to drill down, to give an example of just how one organisation or group of organisations benefits economically from the work of volunteers, we carried out some work with the hospice movement, which relies so heavily, as you know, on volunteers a few years ago. And that study estimated that volunteers working for the hospice movement contributed something like £100 million a year in unpaid time. So volunteering has a huge economic worth, and we can value its contribution in that way. But of course the contribution and the value of volunteering goes way beyond economic terms, and as Richard has already hinted at, volunteering has huge benefits in terms of building social capital, building trust amongst communities, helping to make our communities more inclusive and better places to live. It's no surprise, I don't think at all, when we look at some of the research that suggests that volunteers know more of their neighbours than people who don't volunteer, that they tend to think of the place that they live more positively than people who don't volunteer, that they have more trust in terms of the community and the organisations that they work with. So volunteering has a real value in terms of bringing us together, binding communities together. But the beauty of volunteering, and when it works well, and again Richard talked about this, is that volunteering is really a reciprocal, a mutually beneficial relationship. And not only do communities benefit, not only does the economy, society benefit from the great work that volunteers do, but the fantastic thing about volunteering is that the individual who is volunteering gets a great deal back as well. Volunteering is good in terms of people wanting to find a foot into the labour market. It's good if people want to think about experimenting with a career change. There's evidence that suggests that volunteering is good for physical and mental well-being. And it also taps into the happiness debates that are around at the moment. And one of my favourite surveys suggested that volunteering was the second greatest source of joy. And you might ask what was number one, and surprisingly it wasn't working for the civil service. And also surprisingly, as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't supporting Watford Football Club. It was actually Scottish country dancing in this particular survey. But the important thing, I think, is that volunteering brings tremendous satisfaction for the individual as well as for the communities that volunteers serve. And if we needed any further statement about why volunteering was so valuable, then we can look at some of the evidence about how volunteering is crucial for our democratic health and well-being as well. People who volunteer are more likely to vote, they're more likely to be engaged in a whole range of civic activities. So volunteering as essential for our democracy alongside all of those other values, I think, really brings home to us just why volunteering matters in our society at this particular point in our history. The second point I wanted to talk about briefly was about the trend that we've been seeing recently in terms of employers getting much more interested in helping to facilitate volunteering amongst their staff. And that, of course, for this audience is particularly within the public sector, but there's also a long-term trend over the past 20 years or so for the private sector to look for ways in which they can encourage their staff to volunteer. And, of course, it's no surprise as to why this is taking off, because that reciprocal, mutually beneficial nature of volunteering that I've just talked about is very much evident if we look at employer-supported volunteering programs. Everybody benefits when we get it right. The community, of course, benefits from the professional skills that people can contribute. The individual benefits in terms of job satisfaction and trying out new things. And the organisation, the civil service department or the company benefits as well in terms of a more satisfied workforce, a more motivated workforce. So it's no surprise that we've seen a development over recent years in terms of organisations, employers looking for ways in which they can encourage people to volunteer, and the civil service, and we'll hear in a moment from John Knights and the work that he's doing in the Cabinet Office to try and bring some more cohesion and cohesiveness to the way in which that's being developed throughout the civil service. But already I would have to say that you're doing a tremendous lot, and you're in some ways way above the curve in terms of the engagement amongst employers in this country. You'll have seen, I'm sure, the recent survey carried out by Civil Service World in connection with the Civil Service Benevolent Fund that showed that senior civil servants are contributing, about 70% of senior civil servants are already engaged in volunteering. And volunteering people are engaged at about 50% throughout the civil service as a whole. So there's already a tremendous level of engagement from the civil service, which gives us real heart in terms of what we can build on for the future. And John, again, I'm sure will talk about some of the plans in terms of and the different ways in which different departments are looking to facilitate such engagement through days off and matching time that people yourselves are giving in their own free time. Thirdly, I just wanted to talk about having acknowledged that I think there's a tremendous base on which to build within the civil service to build this real momentum behind volunteering. I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the challenges that I think we all face in terms of taking this to its next stage of development. And then finally, just some of the ways in which Volunteering England, I think, can help government and other employers to overcome some of these challenges. One of the main challenges is around people being able to find meaningful opportunities where they really feel that they can make a difference in their communities. And Volunteering England is working closely with the Cabinet Office and other employers to try and broker that relationship between the individual volunteer who's really fired up to do something exciting and meaningful in their community, but then finding the opportunity that's going to make that difference. And one thing we always say at volunteering, because it's quite easy to think that volunteering just happens naturally and that it's free and it doesn't need any organisation and it doesn't need any brokerage, but actually it's not the case at all. And we need to get those systems right, we need to get those brokerage mechanisms right if we're going to really maximise the benefit for the individual and for the community. And at a time we know when volunteering organisations and some of our infrastructure organisations are really feeling the force of some of the public spending cuts, there's a real challenge there for how we can continue to find ways of really making that brokerage work for the benefit of all concerned. So that's the first challenge. The second and third challenges are around some sort of tensions, if you like, about what it is that individuals want to do, what it is I'm sure you want to do, and what your department might think they want you to do to fit in with departmental priorities, and what the community really needs you to do as well, where there's the most need. And I think there are some tensions there, and we have to find ways of meeting those sometimes differing expectations. And one of the most, I think, exciting developments recently within the employer-supported volunteering movement is a move away from people using staff volunteering as a way of team building and of painting school buildings and finding it as a way of getting out and building their own team morale. And I wouldn't want to knock that altogether, but actually that's not where the greatest need is in our communities at the moment. And so we've seen a move away from that sort of team building, painting buildings form of employer-supported volunteering towards the more skills-based volunteering, where people can use their professional skills to really make a difference, to help with IT systems, business planning, the sorts of skills that small community groups are crying out for. But, and this is where there is sometimes a tension, often professionals want to do something quite different from their paid work, their day job, and it's finding a way in which we can marry that sometimes differing expectations, I think, into the future, which is one way in which we're looking to work with government and other employers. The third tension, I think, and we have to be honest about this and put it up front in these sorts of discussions at the moment, is that it's hugely important that volunteering isn't seen as a replacement for paid professional staff at a time of quite difficult economic circumstances for many voluntary and charity groups. That would be the death knell for volunteering if it was seen as simply volunteers coming in to replace paid professionals who are losing their work. And we need to find a way of of selling the case even more strongly that volunteering is about adding value. It's about doing something that's unique. It's about capturing the passion and the experiences and the skills of individuals to work alongside our great professional paid staff in our local communities. And fourthly, I think, and absolutely crucially, in some ways I would put this at the top, volunteering has to remain an element of free choice. It has to be a voluntary activity, and whilst I absolutely applaud the work that the Cabinet Office, that John I'm sure will talk about further in a moment, is doing in terms of trying to link volunteering into the appraisal system. We do that within Volunteering England ourselves, and I think it's great for managers to sit down with their staff and talk with them about the opportunities that volunteering can play for personal and professional development. At the end of the day, we have to recognise that volunteering is undertaken from individual free choice, and it should never be mandatory. So finally, just some of the ways in which Volunteering England can help to move this great movement forward and to work more closely with government. We're already having conversations with the Cabinet Office around how we can support their plans to take volunteering within central government departments forward. We're also working with the LGA, and we've recently piloted two programmes in Solihull and Sunderland amongst civil servants at local authority level to help them think of ways in which those local authorities can set up employer-supported volunteering programmes, and we're looking to work more closely with the LGA to roll that out on a national level. We're also, as Richard mentioned, it's the European Year of Volunteering, and as part of our commitment to that year, we're carrying out some work to try and bring together some of the resources that exist out there already to make it much easier for people to find their way through the morass of different guidance that is sometimes given. And crucially, I think, to make that brokerage relationship between the individual aspiration and the community need work much more seamlessly. And at the end of the year, if we've managed to make strides in that way, I think we would be really pleased and see that as a real achievement as part of our contribution to the European Year of Volunteering. So thank you again for having me here. I think volunteering is in a really exciting stage of its development. I'm delighted that the Civil Service Benevolent Fund has put on this discussion today. I'm delighted that government is thinking seriously about its responsibilities as an employer of ways in which it can work with you to really capture your imagination and talents for the benefit of the community, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.